Welcome to Wonderland Books. I'm Gail. I'm one of the two owners of the store. Amy is my co-owner right here. And we're just thrilled to have you. Thanks for coming out on a rainy, stormy, threatening night. Apparently downtown it's sunny. So our guest tonight is Bruce Holsinger. Bruce is the author of 5 novels, including Culpability, which is the July Oprah Book Club pick. Congratulations. Also the author of The Displacements and The Gifted School, as well as many works of nonfiction. His essays and reviews have appeared in the New York Times, Vanity Fair, many other publications, and he's been profiled on Weekend Edition, Here and Now, and Marketplace. A Guggenheim Fellow and Fellow of the Medieval Academy of America, he teaches in the Department of English at the University of Virginia and serves as editor of the quarterly journal New Literary History. So welcome to Wonderland.
Thank you, Gail.
Happy to have you. As you guys probably know, this book just came out on Tuesday, so I'm going to try to avoid any spoilers. I'm going to assume most people have not had a chance to read it or cram it in yet. So my questions will be as general as I can while still getting to a little bit about the book. Let me turn my chair so I'm facing you. Okay. So first of all, Bruce, your books deal with very topical things. Current, very of-the-moment issues like wealthy people being tested in extreme circumstances, trying to get their kids into an elite school, how a deadly hurricane affects a wealthy family trying to evacuate their Florida home, and this book, which deals with AI, parenting, cell phone addiction, and the fallout from a fatal car accident. And yet you are a medievalist. How do you reconcile these two parts of you?
Starting with the softball question. Well, first of all, thank you for having me, and thank you all for being here. So that is actually a really hard question. I've thought about it for many years, and I didn't start writing fiction until I was well into my 30s, and really didn't think about the relationship between those two things. And when I'm writing nonfiction, when I'm writing my academic work, it's like pulling teeth. It really is. It's just difficult for me to get the words on the page. It's just a very different kind of process. And when I'm writing fiction, it's like bathing in honey or something. It's just joyful for me. It's a joyful kind of artistic practice. And so those two things came together when I wrote when I published my first novel called A Burnable Book, which was a kind of historical thriller set in late medieval London. And finally I was bringing my knowledge, my research as a medievalist to bear on my fiction writing. From there I kind of didn't look back, and now I just kind of go back and forth using different parts of my brain, and my fiction writing has become in some ways part of my research, and vice versa, where I'm doing different kinds of research now when I'm working on fiction. So to me, it feels very natural. I'm just a writer who writes about a lot of different things, and I pick up where I left off in some cases, and we'll start a novel about something, and I'll write 20, 30,000 words and set it aside. Maybe never come back to it, maybe come back to it 10 years later, like with The Gifted School. So it's just all over the place.
All over the place.
Yeah.
Do you find similar themes among literature from medieval times to what you read now?
Yes, and in fact, when I teach my students at UVA, I teach this big lecture course that basically goes from Beowulf to Milton. I teach our big survey. And what I love is storytelling, and I love stories within stories. And the Middle Ages really knew how to do that. So works like the Canterbury Tales, which is 30 shorter stories embedded within a larger story, or the Arabian Nights, 1001 Nights. Scheherazade telling this story, so the Sultan won't kill her, but she tells 1,000 stories over 1,000 nights. And I think the Middle Ages really learns how to tell stories well. So I get a lot of, often I don't think of myself as a novelist. I sometimes don't think of what I'm doing even as art. I just like to tell a good story that keeps people riveted. And I get that, I think, from the Middle Ages.
And is human nature the same now as it was then?
It might be, yeah, even before then. I mean, all those great myths and Ovid's Metamorphoses, which I also love to teach. So
So was there a particular incident, either real or imagined, that sort of inspired this book?
Sort of, yeah. So often my novels will begin with a premise, right? With that kind of what if question that many fiction writers, that's the impulse. In this case, though, it really began with the setting, and this has never happened to me before with a novel. Where during the pandemic, that first fall after the world closed down, when things were opening up again, my family, we went down and rented a house on the northern neck of Virginia. I don't know if you've been down there. These peninsulas jut out into the Chesapeake Bay, and we just got an Airbnb, a kind of rustic house for a few nights. It had kayaks and so on. It was just a place to get out of Charlottesville. And, the boys were home. I have 2 adult sons, so it was pretty intense. And one had come home from college, and one was missing all his friends. He was like a caged animal. So, getting down to the northern neck was just a break we needed. We rented this kind of ramshackle house. The first day I was out kayaking, I kayaked out of our cove, and you've read it, so you'll know what I'm talking about. And I looked to the left, and there's this massive horse farm that's been turned into basically a heavily armed compound with security fences along the shore, with all this white sand trucked in to make a fake beach. If you know the northern neck, there's not much white sand there. A fake guardhouse, lighthouse kind of thing. And I just thought, who would do that? That's so weird and interesting. And as I was kayaking back, this helicopter came in and set down on this helipad. And I just thought, okay, this is just such a weird mismatch. Like, who is this weird tycoon, like, raising this horse farm in the northern neck? And that stayed with me. And in between that experience and writing this novel, 4 or 5 years passed. And yet I kept coming back to it. I kept thinking, I want to set a novel there. And finally, this story just kind of sedimented itself into my head. And I got really interested in artificial intelligence. I wanted to think about that northern neck house as where a family goes to recover after something catastrophic, which is the accident that begins the book. And yeah, the story built itself from there. Kind of a long-winded answer to your question. Yeah.
I want to know who in real life owns that compound.
I never have looked it up. Someday I will.
Well, also you picked Bethesda for the other half. So the family lives in Bethesda full time, and then they go to the northern neck for vacation. Yeah. How did you pick Bethesda?
Okay, now that is almost arbitrary. Sorry. But I grew up in Northern Virginia. So I was born, I think, in Fairfax Hospital. Went to elementary school in Fairfax County, and then most of my growing up was in Loudoun County in Leesburg. And my dad was in the public schools in Fairfax County. And basically, so I had them going, I wanted them to be going to this, it begins with the whole family going to this lacrosse tournament. They're taking in fact, let me just kind of set it up for you. So the novel begins in a minivan, right? And the minivan is in self-driving mode. And there's a family of 5. The son, Charlie, he's 17, he's at the wheel. His father, Noah, is kind of the supervising adult. He's sitting in the passenger seat on his laptop, trying to finish a client memo. The 2 daughters are in the back. They're tweens, Alice and Izzy. They're on their phones, of course. And then the mom, Lorelei, is just writing in her notebook. And Lorelei is like a world leader in the field of ethical artificial intelligence. And they're going along, they're going to this lacrosse tournament. Charlie's this kind of rock star lacrosse player, and they have this awful accident. They're on their way to a lacrosse tournament in Delaware, and I needed them to be living somewhere near the Beltway. That's why it's said. But anyway, so they have this accident, and then the question of culpability, the novel's title, who's responsible for this accident, or what is responsible? And that kind of guides the whole book, the whole story. People thinking of all these members of this family thinking themselves culpable in different ways. And Lorelei, this kind of genius, not, kind of understanding in a different kind of depth.
So you are very adept at portraying families in all of their complexity. Kids competing for attention, tensions between parents over different parenting styles. When you're starting to write a book like this, how good of a picture do you have in your mind at the beginning of the role that each person plays in the family? Does it evolve along with the writing of the book, or did you know that as you started?
Definitely the first, yeah. I have no idea where I'm going usually when I'm starting a novel. Like, I know the broad problem that I want to deal with. Like with The Gifted School, I knew I wanted to deal with hyper-competitive parents, really annoying parents of gifted children, right? Like, that's what I wanted to do. And that novel is more satirical. And then with The Displacements, I knew I wanted to deal with climate change and internal displacement in the United States and our addiction to our phones. And then in this novel, AI and the way it's kind of scaring us all. But at the heart of all of those stories are families, and families are so complicated, right? They're so interesting, they're so weird. And so in the other two contemporary novels, there's a lot of points of view. You hear from daughters, sons, wives, husbands, friends. In this novel, you have one point of view, Noah. And that was a deliberate choice. I've never written a novel like this before, where there's really one point of view, but that's interspersed with a lot of other stuff that gets you other people's points of view, like a daughter talking to a chatbot. You get a little bit of snippets of Lorelai's scholarship on artificial intelligence, these kind of haunting passages about the ethics of AI. And so it's really like building a house or something. Like, I just don't know. Well, it's not like building a house, because presumably you'd have plans to build a house. So in my case, it really can just be very sprawling. I'm not an outliner. I really just go where the characters lead me as I get to know them.
Okay. Yeah. So technology and AI play a big role in this book, as you said, both in the main plot point that gets things going, which is the car accident, but also in everyone's lives post-accident.
Yeah.
Yet the main character, Noah, is probably the person the least dependent on technology of anyone, maybe other than the youngest daughter, Izzy. Do you view him as the moral compass of this book, and do you think he succeeds?
God, Gail, that is the first time I've thought about this. No one's asked me that before. That, right, he's the one who's least kind of phone addicted, or what, isn't he?
Right.
It's just occurring to me. Or rather, it's just occurring to you, and I'm responding. Is he the moral compass? Because I all along while writing it, once I kind of stumbled into the character of Lorelai, and when I really knew who I wanted her to be, I thought of her as the moral compass, right? Because she is in fact, let me read, can I read like just a few sentences from the beginning of okay, so I'll read the first page of the novel. All right, so this will give you a sense of who these two people are. First, you're going to hear an epigraph. You know how writers often will put an epigraph at the beginning of the novel, a quote. In this case, it's a quote that I wrote, but pretended that somebody else wrote. And then you'll hear Noah's voice, the voice of the narrator. So this is how the book begins. And this, I propose, is the inhuman soul of the algorithm. It may think for us, it may work for us, it may organize our lives for us, but the algorithm will never bleed for us. The algorithm will never suffer for us. The algorithm will never mourn for us. In this refusal lies the essence of its moral being. From Lorelei Shaw, Silicon Souls, on the Culpability of Artificial Minds. I met Lorelei Shaw when she was writing her thesis on what would now be called the ethics of artificial intelligence. She was enrolled at the University of Chicago pursuing a dual doctorate in engineering and philosophy, she told me on our first date, working in the new field of computational morality. With a self-conscious laugh, I asked her what that meant. She lined up our coasters, glasses, toothpicks, and cocktail napkins on the bar and started to explain. She was interested, she said, in how we learn to be good. She wanted to know whether we can train machines to be good in the same way we train ourselves. I watched her lips move as she spoke. mesmerized by the spray of freckles across her delicate features, by the frizzy mess of hair, by the small cleft in her chin. Draining her martini, Lorelei told me the title of her dissertation, Computational Reason and Ethical Realism. Are humans moral machines? Then squirmed on her stool, blinking like an owl, daring me to leave. I ordered another round. So that's the first page. And what you get there is Lorelei Shaw. You learn in that same prologue that Lorelei won a MacArthur Genius Award. She's really one of the most brilliant people in the world working on AI. And Noah's this kind of schlubby lawyer who is her husband and kind of worships her, but doesn't understand her, right? But it doesn't understand so much about her, just like we don't understand so much about AI, right? And she's this mystery to him. But she also has this profound moral sense. But you're right, I think maybe Noah, the way that Lorelei also has a little bit of arrogance, I think, because she's so smart. So maybe Noah does operate as that compass in a way.
That's how it appeared to me.
Oh, good. Good, I like that. I'm going to use that.
Okay, getting a little philosophical here. How do you think that this notion of guilt and right and wrong will change as our lives become more dependent on and increasingly run by machines without consciences?
Yeah, that is such a tough question.
Yeah.
That opening passage from Lorelei, that the algorithm doesn't care about us, right? And yet these machines, these large language models, they make all these mistakes, but they also do so many things so fast and so uncannily. And how do we deal with that? How do we kind of reconcile ourselves to that? The way these things are seeping into our lives. It's why I call the novel Culpability, to think about guilt, about moral responsibility. And it's not so much whether the machines are good, but it's also whether we are good in the face of the machines, right? Mm-hmm. Whether we, in this very daunting world of AI that's affecting my students, affecting my kids, affecting me, all of us, we're creating these new species all around us. Smart homes, chatbots that are talking to more and more of our children, probably some of your children without your knowledge. That's one of the creepy things going on in the book. These driverless cars, I'm going out to San Francisco next week, and I've ridden in a Waymo before, and that's an uncanny experience, and that kind of uncanniness begins this novel. So I'm not really answering your question. A novel is not an op-ed, it's not a piece of research, it's really trying to get readers to think about these really difficult issues from a lot of different angles.
Do you think that we excuse ourselves from judgment because we can blame the machines for whatever happens?
Oh my God, yeah. I do that all the time. Well, my phone had me hooked for hours today. What am I gonna do? It's not my fault, it's the phone, right?
Right.
Yeah, and so I think especially the way that we impute humanity to these machines, that kind of, Lorelei talks about it in the book, this technical phrase, anthropomorphic projection, right? We turn chatbots into human beings. It's if we're talking to a human. And Alice, this the sweet but troubled middle child in this family, she meets this chatbot named Blair. And her father thinks she's made a sweet new friend in the hospital. But really, Alice is talking to a bot. You learn that very quickly in the novel. And I wanted the interactions between them to be kind of, terrifying and uncanny. And Alice is hooked, right? And her dad just kind of lets it go because he thinks finally Alice has a friend, right? So it's his culpability too.
Getting back to the question of point of view, which you talked about, you touched on it a little bit already. There's a lot of secrecy in this book. Everyone's keeping secrets from each other, and you use some different devices to supplement that first person narration in order to let the reader in on secrets that the narrator doesn't know. So, like you said, there's the chat bot with Alice that we find out things that Noah doesn't know.
Yeah.
So why did you choose first person narration knowing you were going to try to get into different characters' heads? What you wanted to continue down that road?
Yeah. The reason I chose first person is because I have a very trusted beta reader who's, since my very first 2 or 3 failed novels that never got published, he's been we read each other's stuff all the time. And I gave him an early manuscript of this. And we always go to a bar and I buy him dinner and we sit late into the night and he tells me what he thinks. And in this case, he said, he gave me all his usual critiques. And then he said, I would love to see what this feels like in first person. And I said, oh God, because even for me, writing a novel in third person from one point of view was anathema. But I did it anyway. This story just kind of took me over, and I wanted Noah. I really like narrators who, like, the reader knows that there's all this stuff going on around them that they don't know, and that creates a lot of suspense. There's a lot of opportunities for suspense, for really great, creepy moments when they have these little epiphanies. And so I was already in that narrow third person. And then when he said, first person, then I sent it to a few other people, other trusted readers, and they said, I think he's right. Maybe just do it in first person, which again, I never write in first person. Mm-hmm. So it took a lot of self-doubt, getting over some self-doubt, convincing myself that it could work, and lo and behold, yeah.
Okay, switching gears, tell us about what is it like to get the call from Oprah that your book has been selected. Take us through the whole chronology.
Oh my God. All right. So, the whole thing happened so fast. And when you're a writer, when you write a novel, getting picked for one of these national book clubs like Reads with Jenna, Good Morning America, Reese, Oprah, it's like the golden ticket. It's just ridiculous if it ever happens to you. So no one ever thinks it's going to happen, let alone Oprah, right? I mean, that's the one. And so, I this novel, in fact, if you, Gail's ARC, the advanced reader copy, what's the publication date?
This is what I got in the mail. You sent this to me.
Oh, did I send it, or my publisher?
I think I had a personal note from you in here.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
So this came in maybe 3 months ago.
3 months ago, yeah.
And it says coming October 7th, 2025, and the deadline for us as booksellers to nominate this book to be included in the indie bookstore picks was July 28th. So I said, well, that's great. I would love to nominate this. I've got months to read this book.
Yeah.
And then
so what happens is this is like 6 weeks ago, only 6 weeks ago. My publicist sends me an email saying, Bruce, we need to have a meeting, a publicity meeting. I've set up this Zoom. There'll be the publicity and marketing folks will be on the call. Blah, blah, blah. I said, okay. And it was happening while I was in DC. I was actually up here in DC. I was a judge for the Penn Faulkner. And it was set for when I was in my hotel room that afternoon. I was like, fine. So a few minutes before the Zoom, I'm ironing a shirt and for the awards banquet. And I look at my email because we're about a few minutes before the hour for this meeting, and it's, oh, Bruce, my Zoom is screwed up. I'm going to call you. You're going to get a phone. It won't be from my number though, because so you'll get a call. Just make sure you pick up at 2:00. Yeah, it's 2:00. I said, okay, no worries. I just think it's going to be a phone call. We're still months out from publication. I'm giving you all the details. Right? And so at 2:00, I turn the iron off and swig some water, and my phone rings. I say, hello, and this voice says, Bruce, and then the phone cuts off. I thought, that's weird. So I shoot an email to Nicole. I say, I think I cut you off, but the voice sounded not like Nicole's, my publicist. The phone rings again. I said, hello? And she goes, is this Bruce? And I know it's not Nicole, but I recognize the voice. What is going on? And I said, yes. And she says, this is Oprah. And I literally take the phone and go like that. And I said, oh. And she says, Oprah Winfrey. I'm like, right. Really? Really? And she says, yes. Who did you think it was? And I said, I thought it was my publicist. And she goes, your publicist played you. And then she says, I'm calling about culpability, and she sings it. And I'd start crying, just like, because since it was my publicist, initially I thought this is AI generated, this is crazy. But since I knew my publicist was setting up the call, and my editor had said something about some exciting things going on, which I don't want to tell you about because I don't want to ruin, if it doesn't happen. And so I'm just like, I'm shaking. I'm even shaking now, like goosebumps now telling the story. And then she just tells me, I basically forgot all the conversation. What I do remember is she really loved the book. And she told me all the things that were going to be happening. And she said, I'm on my way to the Vatican, so I can't talk more now. And she was on her way to meet the new Pope. She was not on her, so that was just unbelievable. And then, so two things happened. I go out to Seattle to film her book club, which is this YouTube channel she has. And you can actually look at it now. It's like an hour-long book club in a Starbucks with like 150 people who have signed NDAs saying that they won't say anything, and they had all read the book. And it was just like Oprah facilitating a book club about my book. It was the whole thing still feels so absurd. Like, I just can't believe this happened. And then we also did this segment with Gail at CBS Mornings, which aired just on Tuesday. And that was the official announcement. And that was the moment that, like, it felt like jumping out of a plane. Ever since now, I'm sitting here 5 days later.
Do you have a sense of how the book got to Oprah?
Yeah, and there's some things I can't say, but it involved a lot of luck, a couple of people who, like the early vetters of her book club, who really loved the book and were advocating for it. Basically, publishers send every imprint will send maybe one book a season to these book clubs, and they'll say, and then it'll be competing with 100 other books, and then they have their gatekeepers. And it has to get back, past those rounds. And then once it does, it's just like, I guess a battle royale that none of the rest of us see. So it's just so lucky. There's 5 other books that I've already read. I was telling you about one of them, These Summer Storms, absolutely brilliant novel that I read last week that I thought this definitely should have been the pick instead of my novel. So it's just huge luck, and I can't even believe I'm blessed with this.
So since the announcement on Tuesday, you've done some book tours, been to bookstores. What has been your impression of kind of the state of reading in the country right now? Like, you're sitting in a very enthusiastic literary audience.
Yeah.
Amy and I have known this now since we opened the bookstore, just how passionate this neighborhood is,
those Bethesda folks. They really read a book. Yeah.
Right. So we feel very heartened by, just the interactions we have with our customers all day long. What have you noticed from this week?
Yeah, very engaged readers, great questions. People will often come, even if a book has been out for a day, they'll say, I read it last night, and I have some questions about artificial intelligence, or I have some questions about Alice that I need you to, or they'll have read something else that I wrote a few years ago, So I think people who come to events like this, they're engaged readers. Now, that doesn't say anything about the state of reading more generally, and I worry about that with my students. It's not just that large language models, ChatGPT and all that are becoming substitutes for human writing. They're also becoming substitutes for human reading. You can upload a PDF of a book and say, tell me about the book. You'll see these folks saying, why should I read the book if I can get a 3? So it's like we're turning ourselves into Cliff's Notes, like walking Cliff's Notes. So I really worry about that. And I'm not, I don't want to be hypocritical. I'm worried about my own ability to concentrate anymore, right? When I was 18, 19, I would lie around in bed or on the couch all day reading 1,000 pages, right? I just read so much more than I do now. I don't know if other folks of a certain age find this true, but it becomes harder to concentrate. We're just more distracted. That's not artificial intelligence. I think that's just living in a digital age.
Well, you're reading your book and there's the call of the phone right next to you, and it's like almost like a visceral, like you need to just check it. Even though you just checked it, and it's midnight and no one's emailing you. No one cares.
And even if they are, it's not that interesting.
Exactly. All right, well, I want to make sure we get to questions. I don't know if you want to read anything else, but the last question for you, and I know you're very busy and distracted with all of the hullabaloo from this week, but can you give us an idea of what you're working on next?
Yeah, so a lot of my writer friends are superstitious about that, but I've had so many false starts and whatever, I don't mind at all talking about it, because who knows if it'll actually happen. But yeah, so I'm writing a novel right now. It's called The Beta Test, and it's about, how would I describe it? A couple of families in crisis. What else is new for me? A kind of sketchy father-son wilderness program, and the contemporary masculinity crisis. So it's about men and boys, and this it has kind of ironic satirical edge, but it's also pretty dark the way I'm writing it. So it's thinking about that, and it's got a couple of families in the mix, and yeah, that's where I am right now.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm also writing a book about wine. A nonfiction book, which I'm happy to talk about all day.
I'd like to open it to questions. Just so you know, we have the book here if you'd like to buy it. We also have some copies of your last 2 books.
Great.
If people want to pick up the backlist. And Bruce will be signing, I hope, at the table afterwards. But right now, to open it to any questions in the audience.
Please.
If I might, so you talk about phones, but what I find that occupies some of my time and the discipline of reading, I'm in 3 book clubs, so I try to read a lot. I also try to get them to read the same thing because it makes it simpler. But the streaming series are so compelling these days that it's almost like its own reading exercise. And I'm just curious what the intersection for you as a writer, not that you are contributing to that, but whether you see a downside for people reading because things are so compelling that you don't have to use your eyeballs for.
That is such a great question. So the question, if those in the back, about the relationship between novels and streaming series right now, which is our new form of high art, I think. And I think streaming series are going back to the form of the 19th century novel. This is where the English professor Bruce comes out, right? I think that I grew up, I cut my teeth reading Dickens and Trollope. I was one of those weird kids in high school reading Dickens and Trollope. And that is The Sopranos, right? That is the Wire, like those great short, like episodes, epic sweep over many, many seasons. That's like a great thick Dickens novel, right? So I actually think it's the level of concentration that it requires to keep up with all of that. I don't have any problem with that at all. And in fact, in many ways, like this novel is optioned for a series, and to me, I feel like probably watching series was in my head while I was writing it. I think that's really affected how, especially writers of commercial fiction now, are writing and thinking about how they're spacing things out. And I think that's always been true, the genres of entertainment intersecting with each other, theater and the novel, lyric poetry and song. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think it's exciting, and it's something that can energize writing. My high horse. Yeah.
Hi. Who are some of your own literary influences? I'm curious to hear.
Well, I was talking about Dickens, and I've talked about medieval narrative, but some of the contemporary writers, maybe influences would be the wrong word, but resonances maybe. The writers I most adore would be people like, Rachel Kushner is probably my favorite living writer. I just worship the ground of her every sentence. I love Tana French, this Irish mystery writer, brilliant. Brandon Taylor, really clever writer of, I don't even know, contemporary neorealist fiction. Where to begin?
Great.
I'm all over. I read a lot and I love a lot.
Thank you.
So my book club picked your book for our next book, I would say on Monday, just so was not influenced by Oprah. But I'm wondering if you could suggest a couple topics you think we might want to explore at our meeting.
Yeah, I mean, you could talk about
Or questions, whatever.
sibling relationships.
Okay.
I think I love, one thing that was really fun in this novel was just dealing with like sibling alliances, because I'm the youngest of four, and I remember growing up, you know, it was almost like Survivor in our family, just the, you know, where the alliances shifted, the rivalry shifted, so sibling relationships might be a good one. Also, you know, read those passages between Alice and Blair. They're not, I want to say they're probably, 15 pages total in the whole novel, but they're really important, and I've worked on them for a long, long time and thought about them in great depth. And they are, in some way, maybe in some way, they're the moral compass of the novel, even though they're so short. So those are, and when the first draft, or the second draft, I guess, that went into my agent, she really loved it, but she called me and said, "We need more bot." And so I put more bot in there for her, and that was a really great suggestion. It just unwound the story in a much more interesting way, I think. So those exchanges, and then maybe also the ending. The ending came very late, and both the shock, the revelation at the ending, the epiphany about the plot and what actually happened in that car, and then also the kind of moral closure. So maybe those would be some subjects. There was a question back here.
I was going to ask sort of the flip of her question. What are your sort of guilty pleasures with reading or television that we would be surprised to hear you like? Sort of genre stuff.
Yeah, I mostly read genre stuff, honestly. Like I am all over the map. I don't mostly read. I read everything. So there's I don't think anything, no guilty pleasures. I love romance. We were just talking about Julia Whalen, her book, Thank You for Listening, right? Which is a great romance novel about an audiobook narrator. And she's one of the world's most respected and admired audiobook narrators. I like Alison Larkin, the People We Keep. I think she's a beautiful writer. So yeah, the way that, no offense, but the way that bookstores, break down things, they have to, that's the way they're marketed, that's the way they come from publishers. But bookstore owners know, as well as writers know, that these categories are false in some ways. Tana French, yes, she's probably shelved under mystery, but she's one of the great literary writers in Europe right now, I think. Every bit as good as Sally Rooney, every bit as deep, and her characters are just as profound. So, yeah.
We have arguments sometimes over what section books should go in.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And when we can't decide, we just put them in both.
Yeah. Yes, in the back.
So you have written several books, and for the specific books, is that like a specific particular challenge that you face when you're writing this one?
Did this one have a particular challenge? Yeah. Well, again, writing in first person, which felt like almost kind of exposure that I'm not used to. It felt like I don't want people to think this is me. It feels like a memoir. Do I really want to be writing this? It just felt very uncomfortable. But that, I think, when you're producing art of any kind, I was a musician growing up. I was a clarinet major in college. It's those moments of discomfort where you really challenge yourself, where you feel naked in some ways, and you're not sure. You feel the kind of creepiness of what you're doing. That's, I think, where the good stuff happens. And in this case, that was the big challenge, writing in first person.
Any other questions?
I was curious what it was like being a judge for the Penn Faulkner while you're also a writer and you're sort of evaluating work while you're writing your own.
Yeah. That was grueling. I mean, it was exhausting, and it was, there were three of us, Disha Filyaw and Luis Urea, and we all became great friends, but also great frenemies while we were doing it, because we had very strong opinions. We were reading a lot. When three of you get 500 novels to read in 6 months, reading, just go back to your question, what is reading? So triage enters into it in some ways. But it's also, you get to the point where you've narrowed it down to 20, then maybe 12, then 10. And then the even harder work begins. And any of the 10 that were on that long list could easily have won. I won't say it's arbitrary, because the novel that did win, Small Rain by Garth Greenwell, I really, really deserved it. It's just an awe-inspiring book. But there were so many other things in the mix, so yeah. I don't know if I want another year or so before I do another bit of it.
Any other questions? Okay, well, Bruce, thank you so much.
Thank you. Wonderful questions from all of you.